Welcome all. We're absolutely delighted you could be with us this afternoon. We are looking forward to an exciting session with Melanie Kirchhoff, and from the indications that I've seen so far, this seems to be just a topic that extremely relevant at the time, and we're here not only at election season, but just in the terms of having more civic engagement and civil discourse. I think the topic's just really kind of one of those that's kind of right. Tonight we have Melanie Kirchhoff, who is going to be presenting for us. I'm delighted to have her with us. She has been working with Active Classroom and becoming a certified facilitator for us. I'm going to turn it over to Melanie and let her tell you a little bit more about herself. But all of you have been muted for this evening. It helps us to keep down our background noise. So if you would, over on the right-hand side of your screen, you will find a chat button. If you want to ask Melanie a question or make a comment during the presentation, please do so through chat, and I will monitor those for Melanie, and we'll be glad to take your questions. Melanie, thanks for being here, and let me just turn this over to you.
Thank you, Pam. Like I said earlier, it is a pleasure to be able to do this topic in particular. I'm super excited about what we can do in our classrooms in order to promote more civic engagement. So the title of the webinar was Civic Engagement, and what does it mean? As Pam said, my name is Melanie Kirchhoff. I was a social studies teacher for 10 years, and I have been at the district level doing social studies curriculum work for the last 5 years. I'm really excited. I've been working with all secondary levels, so 6th through 12th grade, and I think that this is a topic that is beneficial for all grade levels. So to talk about first the goals of today's session is to explore the definitions and some examples of civic engagement, and to identify opportunities to promote civic engagement in our classrooms. So we're going to look at some definitions. The first one we're going to look at, well, actually, before we get into the definitions, I'm going to ask you to do an activity here using your chat box. So I have what is known as a forced analogy here. And what I want you to do is I want you to choose one of the images that you see, and I want you to complete the statement, civic engagement is like, choose one of these images, and then tell us why. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. I've got my little timer going on here, to type in the chat box your analogy of what you think civic engagement is like.
Okay, great activity for us, Melanie. Thank you. Everybody is going to be using their chat feature. Let's see what we can give Melanie.
Let me know if you would like an example. Thank you, Pam. We've got civic engagement is like a bridge. It links people or citizens to government and other citizens. Civic engagement is like the vegetable assortment because of the mixed diversity. Yeah, the jigsaw puzzle, all the pieces are important and they have to fit together. I like how we've already gotten 3 of the 4. It's a race against time. Feels that way sometimes. Okay, another way of looking at the vegetables. Different examples, but makes a healthy person society. It's truly important to have active civic engagement that is also civil. All right, I'm going to allow about 20 more seconds for one or two more, and then we'll start looking at definitions. Okay, thank you for participating in this activity. I think it's it's a useful activity to include in our classrooms. It allows students, it gives them an example for an analogy, but it forces them to compare what it is they're trying to create the analogy for in order to find similarities between things that don't seem to fit together. And oftentimes my students have truly come up with some amazing analogies similar to the ones that you typed over here in the chat box. The next thing we're going to look at are our definitions. So to start us off with, I went to one of the most important people in my life and asked her what she thought civic engagement was. And her response, if I can get my things to go correctly, was that a citizen is someone who tries to make the world around them a better place. So she kind of combined the idea of being a citizen with civic engagement. This is my daughter who is in 8th grade. She came up with this suggestion after my 5th grade son was unable to tell me anything about what a citizen was or what being engaged is like. And being 13, my daughter, in a very exasperated tone of voice, gave me this particular definition. And I thought it was a great definition because it really kind of takes the idea that a citizen should be engaged in the community and the world around them. So I decided to start off with this one because this is one that we see our students are more likely to kind of have this understanding. It also really kind of fits with some of the analogies that y'all came up with in terms of that connection between a person and the community around them, and the idea that we want this world to become a better place, not just different. I also found another definition that I really liked, and for this one, it said that civic engagement was developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. So that kind of reminded me that civic engagement is not just being engaged when we look at the political arena or political issues, but it's also the processes around us that we need to encourage active participation. The other thing I really like about this particular definition is it includes developing the knowledge and skills in order to make a difference in the world around us. And to me, that really fits well with the role of public schools and school in general, is to help build the knowledge and skills of our students so that they can be good citizens in our world and become more civically engaged. And this matches really well with the C3 framework. In the C3 framework for Dimension 4, they had this definition kind of hiding on page 59. Civic engagement in the social studies may take many forms, from making independent and collaborative decisions within the classroom, to starting and leading student organizations within schools, to conducting community-based research and presenting findings to external stakeholders. Civic engagement is both a means of learning and applying social studies knowledge. So according to the C3 framework, and looking at the inquiry arc with the 4 dimensions, what we see is that civic engagement is not just action, it is also the learning that students need and people need in order to become active. And so I wanted to look at some examples of what civic engagement looks like, having seen these different definitions of what civic engagement is. So I'm going to ask you to go back into the chat box and to let us know what are some examples of civic engagement that you have shared with your students. Let's just take a minute, 2 minutes to jot down some examples that you've shared with your students about what it means to be civically engaged. Okay, so we have voting, working in political campaigns, addressing a need in the community, picking a local issue, and brainstorming ideas for improving that. Okay, volunteerism, absolutely. An informed voter, that's critical, isn't it? Some of these, let's see, being able to share the values of our country and being civically active in the community. So I have some examples that kind of match a lot with what you've included here in the chat box. So I just wanted to go through them and maybe show you one, something that you might not have thought of. Okay, so exactly, the responsibilities of citizenship as well as the rights. So for some examples, someone had already said volunteerism. So yes, civic engagement is volunteering time, money, or talents. These are my 2 kids when they were younger, and their schools encouraged civic engagement by hosting a food drive one year, and then another year asking, suggesting that students participate in a toy drive for Blue Santa, which is for the police force, or Brown Santa with our sheriff's office here in Travis County, Texas. And so my son wanted to participate in that. So that's an example of volunteering. I saw some more examples through Twitter, and in this one, we have an example of kids volunteering their time and talents. And in this case, we have 3rd graders reading to pre-K students. One of our first go-tos is that civic engagement is voting. Some of you talked about having the mock election as well as teaching students to become informed citizens. And what we see here in these 2 tweets, in the first one, we have a mother from Georgia who took her son with her to help model what it means to be civically engaged by going and becoming a voter. In the picture on the right side, this is a tweet of students who organized a little trip themselves, and they went to the polls together and voted for the first time. So these are 18-year-old students. And both of these are from just last week. Actually, I guess they're from earlier this week. My timing. All right, so another example is meeting leaders. In this case, it's talking about what they know. So in the first one, it is students sharing what they know with leaders in the community. In the second one, it was from a Girl Scout troop who met with female leaders in their community who have leadership roles in the legal profession. And so it's the idea that going out and talking and learning from those in the community and sharing their ideas is also part of civic engagement. And then probably most important in the current political climate is the idea of civil discourse. We need to teach our students how to have conversations and disagreements, but in a way where we are not causing issues between people, where it's the idea, we need to help our students disagree with opinions and not confuse opinions with the value of the people who hold them. And I thought that these two images were really well connected to the idea of civil discourse and what that would look like in the world around us. Going back to the C3 framework, when it was created, the creators, this is one of the things they put in the intro. The idea that our students need the intellectual power to recognize the problems around us, to ask good questions and develop robust investigations into them, considering possible solutions and consequences, using evidence-based claims, and communicating and acting upon what they learn. That is some of what I also saw in your responses of examples. And the C3 inquiry arc goes through all of that. And so I wanted to take a look at that just in a little bit more deeply. That what we need to do in our classrooms is help prepare our students to do these by helping them learn what tools and methods they need in order to recognize problems and to promote solutions in a civil discourse. So if you've seen some of our socialstudies.com webinars in the past, you've probably seen the inquiry arc from C3, from the C3 framework. And truly, the entire arc is civic engagement. What we're going to really kind of take a look at is Dimension 2 and Dimension 4 when we talk about how we integrate these into our classrooms. So some examples of what civic engagement in the classroom could be using the idea from the C3 framework is creating a social contract with your students. That was one of the things I did in the classroom. I hope that it's something that other teachers are doing as well. Exploring and respecting diverse perspectives will help us with promoting that civil discourse. Teaching our students what the elements of civil discourse is so that they can apply it within the classroom and hopefully within the broader community. Promoting those inquiry lessons, helping students ask questions and identify problems around them is a key start to having our students recognize their role in the community and their ability to engage with their community, to be active in making the world around them a better place. which goes into the community-based action research projects. Excuse me. Picking that local issue, Jana listed that about picking a local issue and brainstorming ideas for how to improve that is an example of that community-based action research project. And then finally, they need to present what it is they've learned. If we can empower our students to make public presentations to key figures in the community about what they've learned, about ideas that they have, then we help empower our students and we allow them to truly become more lifelong civically engaged citizens. So I would like to know, beyond the examples that you've already provided, when we think about the fact that the teaching and the learning of civics is civic engagement, what is civic engagement going to look like for your classroom? For your classroom, what will civic engagement look like in your classroom? If you would please post your comments in the box. We have one, constructing class policies for discussions and debates. It sounds to me like you're talking about having students take part in constructing those policies. I think that's a fabulous idea that will help them take ownership and hold each other accountable. Thank you, Pam. Simulations are a good way of helping our students experience the feelings that others have. And it's important to have that empathy when we are talking about civil discourse. I agree, Robert. I have a feeling that our students are going to need to do this in the larger community around them as well, and they can be models. Inviting the community to participate is an excellent way of doing civic engagement. You know, Pam, that reminds me of when I developed social contracts in my classroom. I taught predominantly in high school. And it was interesting because people, originally I just kept putting my own roles up. And then it finally occurred to me these students had 10 years of experience, and it was time to let them put that experience to work. And they came up with pretty much the same things that I would have. Breaking down barriers is one of the toughest things I think that we do in schools. Does anyone have suggestions for how to break down those barriers to help our students connect to each other? That's another good idea, having each student look inside themselves and see how can they perform a civic duty, and then discuss their ideas openly in class. Especially a civic duty that is not necessarily voting, since the majority of our students aren't old enough yet. Does anyone else have a suggestion they would like to add before we move on to just questions in general? Pam, I just had an idea based on that comment that the better acquainted we become with people who are different from us, the more apt we are to embrace their opinions. I think social media is one way that we can become acquainted with people who are different from us. And it's something that I would encourage us to find better uses for inside the classroom. Barry, the exposing students to situations outside their comfort zone. As someone said earlier, the simulations are a good way to do that, but also sharing stories from people with different perspectives can also put students outside their comfort zone. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas. The more that we can share ideas with each other, the more options we provide our students. So I'm excited to see the different ideas that you've had. And at this point, we'd like to open it up to questions or comments about civic engagement, what it is, or how to integrate it into our classrooms. Thank you, Pam, for inviting me to participate.
Melanie, just absolutely delighted to have had you this evening. You've really pushed us to think about this idea of civic engagement. And, you know, I have to admit, prior to this, I generally thought of civic engagement as being something more related to politics. I think just the term civic, I always think of that political process and the political arena, but it really does encompass so much more of actions in and with the community. So thank you so much for really highlighting that and talking about volunteerism and how that too is part of our civic engagement. It was very thought-provoking tonight. Anyone else have a comment or question before Melanie goes? It's just been a great session, and like I said, you've really pushed us to do some thinking and processing tonight. Excellent job.
Thank you, Pam. One of the things that I would really like, an idea that I'd like everyone to leave with, is the idea that by teaching civics in our classroom, that is civic engagement. So when our students are learning how to be a good citizen and about civic responsibilities and civic duties, that even that learning is also civic engagement because they need that in order to move forward. So a lot of what you're already doing is helping our students become civically engaged.
Fantastic. And what a great way to kind of end our session on tonight. Thank you, Melanie, and thank all of you who decided to join us this evening. And we'll have this recorded and posted tomorrow as usual, and send you a link if you would like to share this session with some of your colleagues and have them walk through this process and do a little deep thinking. We'd be happy for you to share that link with them as well. So again, just thank everyone for joining tonight. Melanie, thank you for promoting civic engagement and getting all of us to investigate and think about that a little deeper tonight.
All right. Thank you, Pam.
All right. Good night, all.